very excited, as always, to talk to Lauri and Kristen Holmes. They both are therapists at Shoreside Therapies, both specializing in adoption and foster care, working with parents and individuals. And today they're going to be discussing their upcoming adoption support group. And it is really amazing that they are offering that free support in a monthly way. And it's virtual too, so that's great. So let's get started. Hi, Kristen and Lauri.
Hello.
Hi, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, I'm so excited.
Yes, I'm excited too because adoption is not my specialty. And today we're going to be talking about adoption and working with individuals that have been adopted themselves, parents that adopt us, and some of the challenges that come up. Why don't we start with Kristen? You could share a bit about your work with adoption and what therapy looks like when you're working with somebody that has been adopted.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. So I was originally introduced to clients in the foster care system and adopted families and adoptees while I was working in intensive in-home, which for people that don't know what intensive in-home is it's a step down from hospitalization. It is a program that is geared towards people who have severe disturbances or emotional disorders, mental disorders going on. And so with that, I would receive a lot of referrals and work with a lot of clients who had been a part of the foster care or were currently a part of the child protective system, foster care system. I would also work with individuals in kinship care, which means they are staying with a guardian, usually a family member. And I would also work with families who had gone through the adoption process and with adoptees, specifically children, some teenagers. And, as a trauma therapist, I think that I began to see this underlying theme of loss and grief. And I had the opportunity to go through adoption competent therapy training. It's an intensive program that takes place over a period of several months, where I was actually trained to be competent in my work with these individuals and their families. And so seeing and learning and beginning to practice from this lens of adoption competency and focusing specifically on looking at situations, presenting problems, family systems under the guise or through the lens of ambiguous loss and grief, which we'll talk about.
Yeah.
It became very clear that a lot of the reasons that we see these clients, this demographic, is because of the transition and the grief associated with being separated from their birth family, their birth parents. So I do a lot of work in working through what we call stuck spots and their core issues that have to do with identity formation, that have to do with difference, processing missing information or difficult to understand information, processing separation, processing permanency, and what it means to live as an adoptee.
Right.
And so a lot of different things come up. So that's been my experience. And I see it as necessary as a therapist to have an understanding of ambiguous loss, specifically with this population.
Right. And what that means to the client. Yes. So Lauri, can you tell us about your background and path to this work?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it actually mimics Kristen's very, very similarly. I was living in Peoria, Illinois before, and that is where I was also introduced working with foster care at an agency there. My position was intensive placement stabilization, which basically was just going into homes where there was a strong or high risk of the child being displaced. So whether it was because of behaviors, whether it was because of other challenges, the foster parents, whether it was kinship, like family related, or just kind of traditional foster care, that not knowing the child previously, were exhausted for whatever reason, maybe personal reasons, maybe because of just the system being really just hard,
Right.
unfortunately. And so I would come in because every time that a child was placed in a new home, it was a whole nother flood of abandonment, loss, fear, trust broken again of another person that they thought they could trust, no longer feeling like they could trust them. And so my job was to go in and basically help stabilize the home as best as I can, to help the placement stay, to just help them work through all of their mix of emotions.
Right.
And so that's kind of where I started getting introduced. And then I just felt so much for just the system. And I also had the opportunity to work with parents, birth parents, who had lost custody temporarily or permanently from their child, and working with them through the system, and just knowing how I would get exhausted for them or tired for them, of just how it felt like they had to felt like an uphill climb the
Right.
whole time, and so many things were against them. Since then, I have continued in this work, and then started, kind of transitioning more into also adoption. And so seeing children on the other side of foster care, or maybe they were adopted at birth, and yet seeing a theme emerge no matter what their reason is, that they're not living with their birth parents. And no matter what age they, went to live with either their adoptive parents or foster parents, whether it was from birth, right from the hospital, or when they were 3, 8, 12. And so talking about even just biologically what happens when the birth mother and child's bond is broken at birth, or when they're older, what that does. And that has been really reassuring to a lot of adoptees and parents, to just be like, oh, that makes so much sense. I never thought of it that way.
Right.
And so I also had the opportunity 2 years ago, to go through the adoption competency training as well. And so it's like almost a 70 CEUs worth of training. It's very intensive.
So I'm curious a bit on what, if either of you could share a bit on like what specifically some of the things, maybe some examples of what the identity piece, when that's presenting, when somebody's having difficulty with that, what do you tend to see?
Yeah, I want to maybe just start with the reason that we usually receive, an email, or people refer to us or come to us, is because they're seeing concerning behaviors. They're seeing challenging behaviors. They're seeing things that are scary at times, right? We're seeing big outbursts. We're seeing maybe physical or verbal aggression. We're seeing dysregulation or tantrums lasting an hour, 2 hours, right? We're seeing struggle with trust. Either we're seeing a guardedness and a protection that's happening, that the child feels that they need to protect themselves from, or, control issues, or we're seeing no boundaries around strangers, very little boundaries around strangers, easily trusting kind of things. And oftentimes there are talks of attachment disorders. There's medication that's happened. There's stuff going on at school. There's stuff going on at home. It's a gamut of things. I remember in our training, one of the things that we watched as part of our training was Diane Sawyer doing like a 2020, and it was around overly medicating children. And this was back in, early 2000s. And they were seeing, they were kind of following this foster care trend and looking at foster care and adoption, and the struggle with medication and overly medicating a child, or all these things just changing very quickly.
Right.
And can I say too, like with that, a lot of it is misdiagnosed ADHD. So a lot of teachers are like, they are having a really hard time focusing, so it must be ADHD. So then I've seen so many kids come in with ADHD medicine that have trauma, and they're like, the medicine's not really working. And I'm like, because that's not what's going on. And so I just wanted to say that because that's a
Yeah.
huge one that I see in my office is they think it's ADHD and yet they're not responding to medicine. And so,
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
We can see night terrors. We can
yeah,
see hoarding, food hoarding, sneaking food. There's a lot of different things, but it's mainly behaviors that come to
Yeah.
us, especially parenting, right? They're just not compliant. I count, it's probably 100 times that I've heard that. They're just not compliant. They just don't listen to me,
Right.
right? And so that's usually some indicators, right? And
Yeah.
so part of being adoption competent and being able to conduct and perform and do adoption competent therapy is the assessment
Right.
and asking questions that we don't typically ask. So that is
Mm,
usually from the assessment is asking those questions like even to any client, like have you been adopted? Or have you ever been separated from your birth family or things along that nature? So usually through a competent adoption assessment is when we start to see these core issues, these
yeah.
core stuck spots coming up. And it's usually tied to their identity and
Mm,
trying to figure out where they fit, why things are different, why they're not with their birth. They might know some of the story, they might not know any of the story, right? But just this innate feeling of, I am different. I feel like I don't fit. I feel like something is wrong with me. I feel like family and relationships is really hard for me,
yeah.
right? And so those are some of the things that we see with identity. We'll also see things, especially in transracial adoption, which I know is very prevalent here. And I think an understanding of that is helpful because it's a touchy issue, right, with a
Yeah.
lot of families. And having conversations around, like, well, what do you know about their culture and ethnicity? And how much access do they have to that, right? How open are you? So it's the level of openness that we also see. So usually identity is a large part of it. It's kind of like the foundation.
Mm,
And then as we start to explore these things in our identity and what's coming up, there's usually some other things that pop up too, as far as like, differences or the trust component, right? Or what do I do with all these people that I have in my life and I don't know where they fit? I don't even know where I fit. I
right.
don't know how to process. I don't know how to, think about all of these things. I don't know what questions I can ask or if I'm allowed to ask those questions or if those questions are even okay, if that's normal, right? And so I feel like a part of it is not only exploring the adoptees' identity formation, but also the adoptive family's
Mm.
identity
Oh, yeah.
because it's very different. Each family is different, but I feel like there's a component there about how do we integrate our story.
Right. Right.
and I like using the analogy of like a puzzle, right? So I think like each of us almost like are given a puzzle to figure out in life, right? Like when you're born, like you're given this puzzle and your job and as you get older, right, is to find the pieces
Mhm.
and to figure out, why I am the way I am, why I, walk this way, or why my hair is curly, or, why I
Yeah.
care about being an artist and not math, right? All these things. And when you're born into a birth family and you stay with your birth family, right, a lot of those pieces get answered for you.
Right.
So I like using that analogy in that sense to help people too. And I think a huge part of that, right, is the adoptive or foster parents and how much they're willing to learn about their child's adopted child's culture, ethnicity, their family dynamics. Like I said, there might not have answers, there might not be opportunity to do that. And being open to have those conversations.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why adoption work is so important
Yeah.
because there are so many facets to it. And we want to believe that if we, you know, adopt them from birth, that everything's going to be okay. And so when things start to happen or these concerning behaviors start, or the child starts saying things that just we're having a really hard time understanding where this is coming from, it's because of the attachment trauma and the fact that we know that attachment development starts in the fetus, starts during pregnancy. And so if that pregnancy was unwanted, if that pregnancy was not supported, if that mom was experiencing lots of stress, those are all making connections in our developing bodies and our developing brains. And so it's more than just, are you comfortable with talking about adoption with your child? There's so many other aspects of that. And that's why this work, I think, is so important.
Yes, because it is really complex, and there are different aspects, and it is all of the things, which you both touched on the fact that, somebody might be getting medication for ADHD because it seems like that's what's happening. But there is other things potentially happening.
In the chaos of everyday life, finding peace and clarity can seem like an impossible task. But with Headspace, you can cultivate a healthier, happier mind. With guided meditations, sleep sounds, and mindful exercises, Headspace is your personal guide to a more meaningful life. Take a moment for yourself each day, whether you're looking to reduce stress, improve your focus, or get better sleep. With Headspace, you can build a meditation practice that suits your lifestyle, no matter how busy you are. Join millions of users who have transformed their lives with just a few minutes of Headspace each day. Start your journey to a calmer, more balanced mind today with Headspace.
Just even listening to you talk about, too, what that child could be experiencing and the way you were talking about it brought up a lot of emotional feelings for me hearing that, because that could be really hard, really, really hard to be experiencing that.
It often gets more complicated, not more complicated, just more complex when a set of parents or a parent has their own birth children and then adopt or have foster kids. And so I've had parents tell me I hate saying this because I love my adopted child, but sometimes I don't feel as connected, or their behaviors are just really hard. And my birth children don't seem to have those problems. And so it's harder to sometimes love them. And I feel guilty for even saying that or thinking that, but being able to have a safe place to actually say that and to talk about it and know that that's normal, but how to work through that, right? And is there an attachment issue or a challenge, or sometimes the adopted child isn't able to form attachments for a myriad of reasons. And so what do you do when your child doesn't seem to want to attach to you? And that's really hard because it's not anybody's dream to have a child, right, that doesn't want to love you or chooses not to love you. And that does not happen to everyone, right? We have a lot of amazing, beautiful, beautiful stories. But sometimes in those other situations, it's hard. And having a place to know how to ask the right questions and a safe place to talk about it can be really, really valuable.
And I think, too, that brings us to the other point I wanted to talk about today was the adoption support group, right? So thinking about that safe space and being with other individuals going through something similar. So either one of you want to talk about that and what that looks like, what that entails?
Yeah, so we are both really excited to start a new group. It's going to be virtual, so it just allows for, easier access to the group. And it's going to be on the third Thursday of the month in the evening. And we're just going to, it's going to be a support group for foster parents, adoptive parents, anyone kind of anywhere in between. And it's really meant to be a support, obviously, for the parents. Because the process is hard. Process can be long. It can be grueling. And then, all the things we've talked about, so far, of just the different challenges that might be coming up in their households and disrupting their homes. And so it's a place to just connect with others in that same situation. It can be a very isolating experience, especially if there's not a lot of support. And so this is meant to kind of help be that and to be at least a piece of what that can be like. And so as a support group, right, it's Kristen and I will facilitate it. We'll kind of lead it, but it'll be very much client run in that the parents will get to show up and just talk and encourage each other and ask questions about how they handle situations. And then we're there, to offer suggestions or help the conversation flow, things like that.
Yeah, I think that just kind of echoing what Lauri said is that something that I hear and have heard, I have 6+ years working with this population, and, you know, something that I hear a lot is that there is judgment either that the parent feels when they're struggling with their child.
Yeah.
And there's also judgment, I think, also in criticism of the child too. And what I love about where we live is there's a very strong community of parents and families who are going through and have gone through these experiences.
Yeah.
And so there are long-standing groups out there, Facebook groups, support groups, where there's a really strong sense of camaraderie, of family, of community, of connection, of support. And we would love to be a part of that community because we have clients who feel that because they've built trust with us, they would like to do something with us in a group format.
Right.
And so that is why we are not at all saying that, the community is lacking or missing or anything like that. Wherever you get support is where you get support. But Lauri and I had a conversation a few months ago about it is so hard for some families to feel safe and to feel like they can engage for various reasons. Maybe they're overwhelmed or what have you, right? And so we just wanted to add to that pool. We wanted to add to that community. And we would really like to see relationships formed within the group members. So the group is open. It's not a closed group, which means you can come and go. We can add families as they find out about us, as they join. There's not like a start and an end date specifically that's closed to other people. We do have a screening process in place just because it is a group. And there are, group guidelines, trust, confidentiality. And we also want to make sure that our families have support as well. So that is why that screening is in place, so that because Lauri and I have so much experience in this, or have a lot of experience combined, we know of other resources. We know of therapists, clinicians, we know of resources within the county and things like that. And so we want to make sure that we're not only, having conversations around what our group guidelines are and preparing for that, but we also want to make sure that we're gathering certain information. So going back to that adoption competent assessment, there's some key questions that we're asking in that initial screening session. And then once you go through the screening session, and we talk about, the plan moving forward, then you can come and go as you want to, or as you can. You're not committed or like strapped in that you have to be there every time we meet. And so some of the things that we're telling families, we're saying that this is open to anyone, as Lauri was saying, that is in the foster care. They are foster care parents, whether that is that you're seeking adoption of a child or children, or if you're just providing a foster care home for individuals. And so you can have different children going in and out of your home. If you are in a kinship care type scenario where someone in the family other than the birth family or other than the birth parents is taking care of a child, so they're guardians, and or they're living with them. And then we also look for those who are post-adoption, right? We know that a lot of things happen after the adoption is finalized. And so this would be a great group for you if you're post-adoption. This would also be a great group for you if you are experiencing different stages of parenting. So if you're moving from parenting small children to parenting older elementary students, to parenting middle school, to going in teenage, adolescent years, or even this transition between the transitional youth, which is your older teens, 17, 18, and you're transitioning to, we want to make sure that they are like, we're transitioning to adulthood here. So we want to have some conversations around that. The thing that I love about this as well is that Lauri and I are prepping to have specific workshops to offer not only to our group members, but also the community, especially around transitions. We are talking about, a transition when it comes to holidays, because the holidays, the end of the year into the new year can be very difficult for families and for kids and adults who are adoptees. And we're also going to be doing some stuff around, how do you build a support around you? What school resources do you have? How do you know if you need to apply for an IEP or a 504 plan?
Right.
Things like that. So it's not just only offering support, but throughout the year, you'll also be able to engage in specific topical workshops that help you get some more information and some resources.
Yeah, which is extremely beneficial because I think too, just people aren't really aware of what is out there. I feel like that's like number one. Whenever I'm talking to somebody, it's like, well, I didn't know that this thing existed. I didn't know that there were these resources. I don't know when is a time to check and see for an IEP or, how does that all work? So pretty wonderful.
Yeah. And, like I said, Milwaukee County has great resources in place. And if you're here local to us and you've been and you were in the foster care system and now you're post-adoption, you probably have some great resources. And that's totally fine. You don't have to add to that. You don't have to let your circle be open, even more. But for those, especially with international adoption or with private adoption, or even, this group is not only open to those in Milwaukee that are local to our practice, but it's open to anyone who's in Wisconsin. So that's what I love is that because we're virtual, we create a little bit more accessibility. And so in areas where you may not have a lot of supports, you can have a support here. And so we're really excited to be able to add to that.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So we're going to end. Thank you so much, both of you, for coming today.
Yeah, thank you for having us, Lauri.
Yeah. And so if somebody's trying to reach out to you and trying to get information on the group, where do they look?
They can look at shoresidetherapies.com. All the information should be there.
Yep. Both your profiles are there and the group information's on there.
Yeah. So if you're looking specifically to get into the group, a good start is to go to our website, but our profiles actually have ways to contact us, our emails, phone numbers. And so if you'd like to hear more information or register, just reach out to either one of us, Kristen Holmes or Lauri B, and we will reach back.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Or even if you just have questions about adoption or foster care or anything, feel free to reach out and we can help put you in the right direction if we aren't able to help you ourselves. So
yeah, that's wonderful.
Look forward to hearing from you.
All right. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for joining us today on the Wisconsin Wellness Podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion on all things health, well-being, and living your best life right here in the beautiful state of Wisconsin. Remember, your well-being is a priority, and we're here to support you every step of the way. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to rate and subscribe to our podcast for more inspiring content on health and wellness. Take care of yourself and remember that your well-being is a journey, not a destination. We look forward to you joining us again next time on the Wisconsin Wellness Podcast. Until then, stay well and stay inspired.